Well, we've come to the end of the book of Exodus. And as I'm sure you'll know, beginnings and endings are really important. If you think back to when where the book of Exodus began, it began with a people groaning under slavery in Egypt. And it's a dramatic story because God hears their groaning. He remembers promises that he made to their forefathers. And he comes and he speaks to a man named Moses, who he drew to himself out of Egypt to Mount Sinai, and then sends him back to Egypt to initiate signs and wonders to bring the people out to Mount Sinai. And Pharaoh is defeated. His army is crushed in the Red Sea. Israel comes through unscathed. They walk through the midst of the water on dry ground. They wander through the wilderness. And even though they grumble, God provides for them bread from heaven and water from the rock. And he leads them on and on and on to Mount Sinai, the mount where God himself would descend and give them his law and make them his people. They were redeemed for relationship with him. And now, the rest of the book of Exodus has been about the instructions for how the people are to live under his law and how the people are to worship him. And the tabernacle is central to that. We already had a sermon on the tabernacle and how important it is. But here, at the end of the book of Exodus, what you get is glory. You get glory entering the camp and taking up residence right in the middle. You might be familiar with this word, tent of meeting. So the tent of meeting was a place that was set up outside the main camp of Israel where Moses would go to meet with God and to come back with instructions. But here, the tent of meeting has come right into the middle of the camp. This is where the book of Exodus ends. It began with a people without God, and it ends with them, with him, in their presence, in the midst of their camp. And the question that I think is asking us this morning is this: what does it look like to be truly alive? What does it look like to experience life to the fullest? You know, there was an ancient bishop called Irenaeus who put it this way: the glory of God is man fully alive. Have you heard that before? The glory of God is man fully alive. You know, we talk about glory a lot, don't we, as Christians? It's a word that trips off of our tongue relatively easily. But what does it mean? What do we mean when we say glory? Well, glory is a human being fully alive and fully free. Well, I wonder, what does it mean for you this morning to be fully alive? What would your answer to that question be? Because it's actually an incredibly important question for you to have an answer to, because the Bible tells us that to be fully alive is to have God in the center of your life. The center of every decision. To be fully alive means to have God in your midst. It means to know him, like really know him, not just know about him as an abstraction, but to know him as the creator and sustainer of everyone and everything. And not just as the creator, but as your redeemer, the one who brought you out from under slavery to sin and death to himself in love. And here in the book of Exodus, God moves in. He moves in with his people. He sets up his address with them. He moves with them on their wilderness journey onto the promised land. But how do you know if you've been redeemed? How do you know if you're fully alive? If you have a definition of what being fully alive is, how do you know here this morning when you're sitting here in these seats that you are really fully alive? How do you know that God has moved in? How can you spot that God has moved into your life? How can you spot that God has moved into your church, into your community? How do you know? If knowing God is the meaning of life and the glory of God is a man fully alive, how do you know if you've got it? So this passage teaches us that there are ways to spot it. That when God moves in, when God comes into the center of your life, there are several things that happen to you. And they might seem a bit strange to begin with, but bear with me. Because we have to allow the Bible to be strange. We have to allow the Bible to upset us. We have to allow the Bible to be weird, because it's in the strangeness and in the tension that we actually find the truth when we press on it. So here are the three things. How do you know God has come into your life? Firstly, there's a reordering of what you worship. Secondly, there is a new weight of glory in your life. And finally, you learn to live under a cloud. Learn to live under a cloud. Stay tuned for that one. Firstly, there's a reordering of what you worship. There's a kind of restructuring, a renovation that happens when God comes into your life. And we touched on this before, actually, when we covered God giving the very detailed instructions for the tabernacle. I won't go back over them because they're basically half of the book of Exodus. Incredibly detailed instructions. But again, it bears repeating because it's so important that liberating the people from Egypt is only half the story. We tend to think that the book of Exodus is all about the people being freed because it's the exciting bit. It's the bit that we hear about at Sunday school, and we tend to skip over the second half of the book of Exodus because it's a bunch of very detailed instructions about wool. Not so exciting unless you're a sheep farmer. Why are they there? That is telling us that you've never actually finished with God until you come to worship him. That actually being saved is only half the picture. The rest of it is coming to worship him. The book doesn't end with worship. And consequently, you are never free until you worship. You are never free until you are captivated and enthralled by the glory of God himself. That there is no true freedom that exists without falling to your knees before the glory of God and saying, this is what my soul and my heart were made for. Discovering that is what makes you a Christian. I may have used this quotation before, and if I have, forgive me, but I think it sums it up so perfectly. There was a 16th to 17th century poet named John Donne, one of the most famous poets in the English language, and he wrote a sonnet, a love poem, right? And it was a love poem to God. And he put it like this: "But I am betrothed unto your enemy." He's talking about Satan there. "Divorce me, untie or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me. For I, except you enthrall me, shall never be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me." That's strong language. But friends, that is a summary in 17th century English of the book of Exodus. I will never be free, Lord, unless you enslave me. I will never be pure and chaste unless you ravish me. That is a great summary of the book of Exodus. And remember, a sonnet is a love poem. Part of how you know that the glory of God has come into your life is that your loves are reordered, that everything about you, everything you worship is restructured and reconstrued around the glory of God in the center of your life. But how does God do that? How do you get to where John Donne is? How does God speak to someone that profoundly? I'm sure if you're a Christian here this morning, and maybe if you aren't, you want that kind of experience of walking with God. Well, here's how God does it. This passage says he does it in two ways: from the top down and the inside out. That's how you change as a Christian. You change from the top down and the inside out. Firstly, from the top down. So there's a phrase, isn't there, that appears all throughout this passage. It's "as the Lord commanded Moses." Do you know how many times that phrase appears in this passage? You can probably guess. 7. 7 times the passage says, "as the Lord commanded Moses." Okay, Moses went and he set this thing up in the tabernacle, as the Lord commanded Moses. And then Moses went and set this thing up in the tabernacle, as the Lord commanded Moses, and on and on and on. All the making and the assembling of the tabernacle, along with the instructions of how to worship, were dictated to Moses by God. All of these instructions Moses received from the mountain and brought them down to the people. Every intricate and minute detail, down to the very threads that were to be used in the tabernacle, were given to Moses by God. So is God just a micromanager? Is he just really anally retentive? Is he worried that they're going to mess it up? No, actually. Not at all. And this is so crucial for you to understand, even if you've been a Christian for a long time. It's that God is not a micromanager. Because God has authority, because actually God's relationship with you is top down. He is the king and you are the subject. It's guarding something beautiful. It's something that we kick against because we hate restrictions. We hate someone telling us what to do. But actually the Bible is guarding something tremendously beautiful by this top-down relationship, by God dictating things to Moses. And look, Moses doesn't say, "well, who are you to tell me what to do?" No, actually, I don't want to put the ark there. I want to put it over here. I don't want to put the lampstand over there. Actually, God, I'm going to take that under advisement. I'm going to put it actually in this place instead. He doesn't do that. So what's going on here? See, what happened when the people of Israel were left to their own devices? What did they do? They built a counterfeit god. They melted down all their gold, they built a calf, and they worshipped it instead. They took what they thought God should look like and be like, and they made a counterfeit to worship in his place. Friends, the human heart is a perpetual factory of idols. Your heart will be churning out counterfeit gods as long as as broad as the day is long, unless you have something from outside come and tell you about what true worship really is. See, we can't help but worship something. It's what we were made for. It's just something that is part of being human, but our hearts will churn out idol after idol after idol. But what that does is it actually destroys any possibility of a real relationship with God. You know, we're talking this morning about how can you spot that the glory of God has come into your life. Another way of saying that is, how do you know if you have a real relationship with him? Well, friends, it's going to be top down. And it has to be. Because if you were left to your own devices, you would create a God in your own image, and you would actually not be worshiping the real God. You know, there was a novel written in 1972. It was called The Stepford Wives. I don't know if you've read that novel. There was 2 films made about it as well. It's called The Stepford Wives. Now, in case you're not really keyed in with satirical feminist horror as a genre, let me summarize it for you. There's a woman who moves into a suburb in America. She moves into this new town, and she starts to realize that something is wrong. Something doesn't feel right about the happy little community that they have. See, the wives of the town are mysteriously changing. They're changing from these sort of free-thinking and vivacious women into kind of submissive drones that lack any ability or authority to contradict their husbands. Now, these women are replaced with something that just tells their husbands, yes, yes, dear, to anything. Anything you want, I'll cook. Anywhere you want, I'll go. Anything you want from the grocery store, I'll buy. Now, spoilers, it turns out those women are actually robots. The real women are being replaced by robots. Their husbands don't have a real relationship with their wives because they have substituted their wives for counterfeit robots. Now, it's a silly image, but that's exactly what happens with the human heart when it comes to God. Every time that we try and conceive God in our own image, every time we find something in the Bible that we reject about him, we're essentially creating a Stepford God. You know, you might not have a relationship with God at all. You just have a God with a chip in his head. A God of our own design who is shaped by our own beliefs and lacks any ability or authority to challenge them. Most of our relationships with God are bottom up in the West, not top down. But the Bible is very top down. See, most of us don't have a God who can confuse us or challenge us or contradict us or even rebuke us or discipline us. But if God truly is the Lord of all creation, and by the way, that's what the tabernacle is saying, he's the Lord of everything, the Lord of the cosmos, then you are going to have to be reordered from the top down. You've got to worship God according to who he is, not according to how you want him to be. You know, if you're going to church and you come away unaffected and unchallenged, the chances are that God might not be in your life. But if you start to sense that when you come to worship him, that there is someone on the other end of the line pulling to draw you in, then you will know that the glory has started to come into your life. If the Bible has ever angered you, if the Bible has ever upset you, that's a good sign, because God is reordering you from the top down. But it's not just the top down. It's actually from the inside out as well. Did you notice that when Moses assembles the tabernacle in verse 3, where does he start? Where does he start? He starts in the middle. He starts with the ark. Now, the ark was supposed to be in the Holy of Holies, the most holy place where only the high priest could go once a year. But that's where Moses chooses to start. And from there, he works outwards. He builds the tabernacle outwards from the center. Listen, this is telling you that when God moves into your life, he does so from the inside out, not the outside in. And that is actually the fundamental difference between Christianity and every other religion out there. You know, I've talked to a lot of people about coming to church, and a really common objection that you hear, maybe you've heard this before, is, listen, I'll come when I've cleaned my life up a bit. And I feel like church is for good people. Church is for people who wear nice clothes and have their lives and their finances and their families sorted together. I don't feel like I'm worthy to come to church at the moment. I'm afraid that I'll be judged. I'm afraid that I won't be good enough to sit amongst all these people. That's a really common objection. You know, some people think that having God coming into your life is about changing your moral behavior, cleaning your act up, getting things right before you come to him. The opposite is true. The absolute opposite is true. Listen, who were the people into whose camp the Lord was coming? We've already mentioned it. They were the people that made the golden calf. They were the people that grumbled in the wilderness, seeking to kill Moses and stone him to death when they didn't like the food. These are the kinds of people, the same generation that would perish in the desert later on in the story. These people weren't holy. These people weren't clean. Not in and of themselves. It was the presence of God in their midst that made them clean. That's the definition of holiness. Some of you here this morning have a wrong definition of holiness. You think that holiness is separating yourself from other people. You think that holiness is trying to exclude the world from the outside. That is not what holiness is. Holiness is moving in. Holiness is moving into the mess, into the neighborhood, into the unholiness, and making it holy by your presence. God moved in the midst of an unholy people who rejected him. That's what holiness is. From the inside out. That's what really changes you. Because if you think that holiness is outside in, that you have to change your behavior and beliefs and then God will come into your life, you'll be miserable. You'll be miserable. You won't really change. You'll be like a whitewashed tomb. But if you allow Jesus into your heart, if you invite him into your life, if you gaze upon his beauty and his glory, if you really meditate upon the fact that you can't be holy without him, it's impossible, then your heart will be open. Then you will really change. Because you have to submit to his authority if he really is who he says he is. But you also have to embrace him from the heart and love him because he is worthy of love. Your heart will melt and change when you realize that here is the God who has come from the top down. He's descended from heaven to earth to pitch his tent in your midst and to change you from the inside out. Because the problem is not Israel's behavior, it's Israel's hearts. And when those change, then God is really in their midst. That was a long first point, but I think it bears talking about. The second thing, the second marker of glory in your life, the second marker of God coming into your life is a new weight of glory. A new weight of glory. Verses 34 and 35 mention this. The glory cloud descends into the camp. Did you see where that happened? Now, the Hebrew word for that is called the Shekinah glory. Shekinah in Hebrew means to dwell. So the Shekinah glory cloud means the cloud of God's dwelling. The cloud where God comes to dwell in the midst of his people. It's a cloud that shields them from his awesome presence. Because if God were to appear in all his fiery glory in the midst of the camp, they'd be incinerated in an instant. You know, that the cloud both reveals God because it shows that he's truly there, but it also conceals him because he has to do that to protect the people. But this glory is actually something Moses had pleaded to see back in Exodus chapter 33. You know, Moses could have asked God anything, but what he says to him is, show me your glory. Show me your glory. This is what he was talking about. See, when God moves into your life, there is a whole new kind of glory to it. Okay, well, what does that mean? What do you think of when you hear the word glory? Most of us think about the sports field, don't we? I mean, many of us this week are thinking about the football field, aren't we? Because Scotland qualified for the World Cup for the first time since 1998. Glory. I mean, I heard on the news all of the Glaswegians that were singing for joy because Scotland had qualified for the World Cup tournament. That's glory. Don't mention the English cricket team at the moment because they did not exactly cover themselves in glory either. Tom Sislak is laughing because he knows what I mean. They got thrashed recently, as they usually do. But when we talk about glory, we are either talking about the sports field or the battlefield, don't we? We talk about a glory, a glorious victory, won at great cost. But what does the Bible mean when it talks about glory? What does this word glory mean in this passage in Exodus chapter 40? Do you know that the word for glory is the same as the word for weight? Exactly the same word in Hebrew. Glory is a kind of weightiness. It means substantialness. Glory in the Bible means that something supremely matters. You know, it's like if you ask several people's opinion about something that you want to get the answer on or some important matter, you'll usually go with the person's opinion that you will give the most weight to. You ever done that? Well, that's what glory is. Glory is a kind of weightiness. Glory is ascribing worth and weight to a person or a thing. And glory is actually something that we can't live without. I don't know if you've thought of yourself here this morning as a particularly glory-hungry or thirsty person, but you are, actually. By design, all of us are hungry for glory in one way or another. Every single one of us is giving something in our lives ultimate weight Think about it. Why are we so sensitive and irritable? Why do we fly off the handle so easily when someone criticizes us or threatens something that we're proud of? It's because we're desperate for glory. It's because we're proud at heart. We're all seeking glory. See, everyone in this room needs to know that their life matters. I don't care who you are, even the person standing on this platform. We all need to know that our life counts for something. We all need to know that our life that matters, that it will last, that we've done things that will not just blow away in the wind. Every one of us is afraid that we are just dust in the wind that will blow away when we're dead and no one will remember us. And we're all seeking that glory. Some of us seek it through relationships, whether that's a romantic relationship with a partner or whether that's a relationship through our children. Some of us are seeking that glory through success and achievements and employment or climbing up the housing ladder. Some of us are church people and are seeking that glory through influence and authority and power within the church. We are all seeking glory. We want a name. We want to know that we matter. We want to know that we have weight. We want to know that we're not insubstantial. But I bet you there are people here this morning who feel weightless, who feel inconsequential, who feel like they actually don't matter at all. Maybe they've been told their whole lives that they don't really matter. And we feel socially or emotionally weightless. And when we feel like that, we look at people who seem to have it all. We look at people who seem to have weight and glory and influence, and we envy them because they seem to be like people of substance, people of consequence, right? Nobody ignores those kinds of people because they have a kind of glory. They have a kind of weightiness. But the secret there, actually, is that even the most seemingly successful and glorious person is consumed with doubt and despair on the inside. Because it doesn't matter how high you rise, every person is asking, is what I've done going to last? Does it have weight? What am I building on? Is it really going to matter? Everyone is harboring those regrets, whether they're failures or successes. Why is that? Well, it's because you were made for glory. You feel that way because it's true. There really is a glory that you were made for. There really is a beauty that your eyes were made to behold forever. And your heart knows that, even if your head denies it. And you are seeking that glory in all the wrong places because you were meant for the glory of God himself. And that's what comes into the center of this camp here. The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. That is what you were made for. See, there is a chasm of glory so deep and so wide and so large in your heart that all these successes and achievements and money and family in the world wouldn't even make a dent in it. Because it was made for the glory of God to come into the center of your life and into the camp, so to speak, and to plug that gap. That is the glory that you were made for. You were made for the glory of God alone. Right, what happened when the glory of God descended on Mount Sinai? What was happening to the mountain? Smoke, fire, earthquake. God is so real, God is so substantial that when he comes down to the mightiest and most substantial thing that ancient people could ever think of, it begins to crack at his presence. Here's the thing. If you are becoming a Christian, or if you have become a Christian, things in your life are going to have to start to give way. If you have become a Christian and nothing in your life has changed, you haven't really met God. Listen, if he comes down and the mountains themselves quake at his presence, then your habits and behaviors are going to have to change as a result. Nothing can stand in his presence. Everything has to flex and change and be transformed by his presence and his glory in your life. See, God hasn't just come in to rearrange the furniture. There's a lot of furniture in the tabernacle, isn't there? But that's not what God has come to do. God has come to build a whole new temple. He's come to build you into that temple as well. You better believe that there's going to be things about your life that will have to change when you become a Christian. See, when Moses begged to see God's glory, what did God say to Moses? No, you cannot see my face, for no one can see my face and live. God says to Moses, you can't see my glory. It'll kill you. It'll be fatal. That's a deep irony. The glory that we were made for, we're always on the outside. We can't see it. See, in our passage, Moses can't even enter the tabernacle, can he? The glory cloud is so intense, he can't even penetrate it. Later on, under King Solomon, when the temple is built, God's glory fills the temple in Jerusalem, and the priests fall flat on their faces. They can't stand to minister. So weighty is the glory of God on them. See, all of that is saying, let me summarize it for you. God alone has glory. And his glory is the only glory that matters. He alone carries weight and significance. And the moment that you acknowledge that, the moment you bow before his glory, the moment that that weight falls upon you, that's when you are really getting to know him. Because when God comes with glory into the center of the camp, it's the glue that holds the whole thing together. Without God's glory, Israel wouldn't have even been a people. God's glory in the center of the camp is like the sun at the center of the solar system that holds all of the planets in their dancing orbits. That's what the glory of God is in the life of a church and in the life of a Christian. One of the ways you know God has come into your life is that you're more solid than you used to be. You're not blown around as easily. You're not as devastated by difficult circumstances. I'm not saying you don't get sad. I'm not saying you don't grieve. I'm not saying you don't get anxious. But you are far more rooted than you used to be. You're anchored to him. See, every other glory we seek to fill our lives with is like depending on tissue paper to anchor us down. It's just going to blow away and take you with it. But God's glory will anchor you not just for your life, but for eternity. By having every other glory displaced by God means that when you suffer, when it feels like life is falling apart, your anchor will hold. And you won't be destroyed. You will not only survive, but you will thrive in the midst of it. Your life is reoriented around something greater than yourself that is solid and substantial and everlasting. There's the weight of glory. That's what it means. So God doesn't only come to reorder you from the top down and the inside out. He comes to give you a glory that you truly need, a weight, a substantialness, a meaning to your life that you can't find anywhere else. But there's a final thing here, and it's probably the strangest one. Because one of the ways you know you're fully alive, one of the ways you know that God is in your life is that you're learning to live under the cloud. So verses 36 through 38, they describe how this Shekinah glory, how this glory cloud was over the tabernacle in the sight of Israel throughout their wilderness journeys. Every Israelite could see this pillar of cloud, and they followed it as they journeyed to the promised land. They were a people who probably had a crick in their necks because they were looking up the whole time, looking up at this glory cloud leading them. They lived under a cloud. I mean, those of us who live in Scotland know what it's like to live under a cloud, don't we? I call it the Iron Dome. We just live under the clouds. We've had beautiful sunshine recently. But Israel are learning, and they have to learn, to live under a cloud. And this is actually profound, right? Think about the story of Exodus from the beginning to this point. Now, the word cloud is not mentioned in the first chapters of Exodus, but weren't the people living under a cloud? They were living under the cloud of darkness, the cloud of slavery, the cloud where their sons were considered sheep to be slaughtered, the cloud of oppression, the cloud of loneliness, the cloud of not knowing God, being without him in the world. They were living under a cloud. They were locked in this merciless slavery with no future and no hope under a genocidal king. That's the first cloud. But what cloud are they under now? What a change. At the end of the book, they are under the cloud of God's grace. They're sheltered by his presence. They're guided by his light and his wisdom. The God who had freed them from under the cloud of darkness and brought them to himself. They'd gone from under a cloud of death to the cloud of God's own protection. So Exodus is telling us that the entire story of salvation is about being transferred from under one cloud to another. Have you reckoned with that? Which cloud are you living under this morning? Listen, even as Christians, we can live under a cloud, can't we? We're so often in the doldrums. We're a terrible representation of Christianity because we're always miserable. We're always whining. We're always moaning. We've forgotten that we're living under the cloud of God's Shekinah glory to guide us by day and by night. See, Israel didn't have to worry about what was going to happen tomorrow. They just looked up. And if the cloud was still there, they stayed. And if the cloud had moved, they moved. It really was that simple. They lived under his cloud. But if you're here this morning and you're not a Christian, you have to know that the book of Exodus is telling you you're living still under the cloud of slavery and death in Egypt, even if you don't acknowledge it. And you need to come under this cloud, the cloud of God's grace and glory and mercy and guidance and wisdom and peace and strength. Are you aware which cloud you're living under? See, there is a weight of glory that can come into your life through the gospel that will dispel the clouds of darkness that you're currently living under and will shelter you with its presence for the rest of your days, no matter what happens. See, like the Egyptians who chose to join Israel Some of them did. Come and live under this cloud. Today is the day of salvation. Why do you hesitate? The cloud is there. It's waiting for you. So there's a great biblical scholar that I've been reading called Al Motia. He's a British guy. And he finishes his commentary on the book of Exodus with these words. I just wanted to share them with you. Between these two clouds, the sovereign Lord of the whole earth had routed all the power of the enemy, granted his people deliverance, brought them to himself by the blood of the Lamb, there's the Passover, graced them with his directive law, and come in the fullness of his person to take up residence in their midst as their indwelling God. This is the story of the book of Exodus. What a beautiful story. But there's a snag. You're probably getting tired of me saying this. As always, in the Old Testament, there is a snag. Because look at verse 35. Moses can't get in. He's living under the cloud. He's beholding the glory in some way, but he can't get inside. See, actually, the tabernacle was the center of the universe. It was a place where God himself came to dwell with his people. It was like the Garden of Eden. It was a place where you could fellowship with him freely, but there was only one person allowed in that place once every year. The glory has descended. It's come top down. It's starting to reorder the camp from the inside out. The weightiness has descended, but there's still something left. Moses can't get inside. So the final question we're going to leave ourselves with here this morning is, how do you get not just under the glory cloud, but inside the glory? I guarantee you there are plenty of Israelites who didn't really have a living relationship with God, but they'd still come under his shelter. They were still enjoying the benefits of his presence. There are many people who come to churches and aren't Christians. They're still sheltered by the presence of God. But they haven't actually gone inside the glory. It hasn't actually changed them from the inside out. How do you behold it? And it's really simple. Now, none of us can see a literal cloud like the Israelites did, can we? When was the last time you saw the Shekinah cloud of God's glory radiating fire from within? If you have, let me know, because I would love to see it. But in Luke's gospel, in the New Testament, there is a place where Jesus takes his disciples up a mountain, takes a small group of them up a mountain, and a cloud descends on them. And the disciples are absolutely terrified because they've read the Old Testament. They know that whenever a cloud descends, the presence and the glory and the awesome weight of God is there as well. And they're terrified because they think they're going to be struck dead. But the cloud dissipates. And what's in the middle of the cloud? Jesus. It says in the text that they saw no one standing there but Jesus only. He's in the center of the glory. You want to behold the glory of God? Look to Jesus. Look at him. Look at his word. I realize we're running out of time here, but I can't help but share these things with you. There's so many things I've seen in this passage this week. Another thing that is so moving to me. You know who else appears on that Mount of Transfiguration? Two other guys from the Old Testament. Elijah, prophet, and Moses. Interesting. Moses appears on another mountain with another cloud. Moses had asked God, show me your glory. And God had said no. Fast forward to the New Testament. God hadn't said no. God had just said not yet. Because Moses did see the glory that he longed to behold. He didn't behold it at Sinai. He beheld it in Jesus. The glory that his heart had longed to see, he found in the face of Jesus Christ. And that is beyond what I can explain with my human words. And it's interesting because in Luke's gospel, Jesus is talking with Moses. And he's talking with Moses about, it says in our English translation, his departure. It's not what that word is. Actually, that word is exodus. Jesus is talking with Moses on the Mount of Transfiguration, generations after the Exodus, about his exodus. You know, he's talking about the cross. You want to see the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ? You see it at the cross. That is a place where God's glory is manifest. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory is of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. That's what God's glory is. It's the fullness, the plenitude of grace and of truth. You know, when in John's gospel, when Jesus goes to the cross, he says, now am I glorified. At that moment, at the moment of his humiliation, at the moment of his cross, at the moment of his death, that is the moment of his glory. You want to behold the glory? You don't need a cloud. You just need to look to Jesus. And you can do that by opening his word. You can do that by coming to church. You can do that by talking to another Christian. And this is something that the whole tabernacle is whispering to you. You need to see the glory of Jesus in all of this. Jesus is the ark. Jesus is the testimony. Jesus is the lampstand. He's the bread of the presence on the table. He's the table. He's the altar for incense. He's the altar for sacrifice. He's the bronze laver with which you can be washed clean. He is the glory of God dwelling in the midst of his people. Jesus is all talking about him. Every thread of the tabernacle, every part of Israel's sacrificial system is temporary. It's a pattern of something that Moses saw in heaven. Do you know who he saw in heaven? Jesus. That is the glory of God. I'm going to leave you with this. I have seen this in people's lives recently. One of my great privileges as a pastor is I get to sit and read the Bible with people. And there are two guys in the church that I've been reading the Bible with over a couple of years now. And I've started to see them get it. I've started to see them make connections in the Old Testament as they've searched for Jesus. They're hungry for his glory, and they're seeing it. This can happen. I'm not just trying to sell you something that is abstract. If you dedicate yourself to this word, if you open your heart to Jesus, you will see this thing too. Ask any Christian who has been in this church for a long time, and they have seen the glory as well. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. And that glory can come into your life. That cloud can overshadow you. So we've come to the end of the book of Exodus. God with his people. But we've come to the beginning of Advent. And what is Advent telling us? Emmanuel, God with us. So would you come over the Advent period? Would you behold the glory of God in an infant, in the straw? Because you'll see glory. We may not look like a glorious bunch, but the glory is not in us. The glory is in God alone. Let's pray as we finish this book and sing together. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Lord, we give you the glory. 1,000 lifetimes would not suffice to speak of all the majesty and the power that we have seen in the book of Exodus. Lord, thank you for taking us through this great story of salvation. And Father, I pray that at the end of this book, that if there's anyone here this morning that has not yet bowed the knee to you, that has not yet been renovated from the top down and the inside out, that they would bow in this moment, that this would be the day of salvation. Lord, for those of us Christians who have been wandering in the wilderness and grumbling against you, Lord, bring us to your presence, to the foot of the cross, and show us your glory. Lord, for those who are worried about what is going to happen tomorrow, Lord, lift their eyes to the cloud that is overshadowing them. Assure them that you will never leave them or forsake them, that just like with Israel, that you are with them all the days of their journeys, you will be with them every day of their life through the trials and the sufferings and the difficult things until they reach that shore of endless praise where they will see the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. Lord, have mercy on us. And as we close our service with singing here this morning, help us to love you and to worship you alone. Thank you for redeeming us for relationship. Amen. Amen.